Hi, Deirdre Verbo here with Let's Talk Seniors, memory care issues, Alzheimer's, dementia, and Parkinson's. Today we have an incredibly special guest. Her name is Sahara Ferruggio. Okay, you're going to have to tell me how to pronounce that name again. Since becoming a licensed funeral director in April of 2016, Sahara has undergone training in public speaking, received certification in being a funeral celebrant. She obtained a Connecticut insurance license to practice an advanced planning counselor, assisting individuals in prearranged funeral plans. I had the privilege of meeting Sahara about a month and a half ago. You're going to be so blown away by what she does, how she started it, and how helpful her service is. She loves to help plan to ensure you meet your budget, your needs, your wishes, and your desires for your funeral. Her goal is to expand awareness and provide comfort to those in need at a time of need. She's on the board of the Connecticut Green Burial Grounds and wishes to have a green burial for herself. We'll hear more about that. Sahara and her husband live in Weston, and they have two lovely daughters, 2 and 9 years old. And without much further ado, Miss Sahara. Okay.
Hello.
Sahara. How are you? Tell me how you say your last name again.
Ferruggio.
Ferruggio. Okay. So you started, welcome, by the way.
Thank you.
And we met at Robin Staver, who's a geriatric care manager, had a lovely party gathering the community. And she introduced me to you. And I was immediately like, this is an amazing person with a great idea. And you came up with it during COVID, which was even more amazing. And you're really filling a niche and a need, and just doing such an incredible service. And I know you've been nonstop busy since you came up with the idea. But tell us a little bit about exactly what you do in your business.
Okay. So from the time I started my apprenticeship to become a funeral director, and in Connecticut, you have to do your schooling and then a 1-year apprenticeship before you can take the test to become fully licensed as a funeral director. So when I signed up for my apprenticeship and when I had this goal of becoming a funeral director, I always thought I'd own a funeral home one day. And maybe I still will. But when I went through my apprenticeship, I realized quick that getting out of bed at 2 a.m. and just every little detail and the weight of the world on your shoulders, having to get all the plans put together so quickly, it took such a toll on me because I'm such an emotional person and I care so much about the people that I'm serving. So I said, this is so much stress. I don't know if I can do what my peers are doing forever. So then I applied for a job doing pre-planning. So I started doing pre-planning right off the bat, about 6 months after getting licensed. And that was my niche because I was really good at taking notes and coming up with really cool ideas for services. And as I was doing this, I was just doing it for the one funeral home that I worked for. And right at the beginning of COVID, I started getting a lot of calls on my cell phone from my neighbors and, friends that didn't live close to me that had questions, or people that might not want to use a traditional funeral home. They were looking for something more quick and simple. They wanted to go right through a crematory, which there's a lot of things and laws that declare exactly how one must be cared for at the time of death. I was definitely restricted with what I could offer through the employer that I had previously. So at that point, in addition, I just had my daughter. I said, I cannot continue to work at this capacity. So I knew that the demand for pre-need was growing with the increased awareness of death, given the state of the world and the pandemic that we were all living through. And I knew that my funeral home counterparts were struggling to keep up with their daily duties with the increased need. So I just decided that I was going to start my own, little area of funeral service and help people get the answers they need and more or less connect them with providers that I thought had a high level of standards and service, while at the same time cared enough to be flexible with their community and price, so that they could actually afford the services that they wanted.
So, Sahara, it sounds like, it's kind of in real estate terms, instead of going to Bank of America to get a mortgage, you go to a mortgage broker who can farm it out and has every type of different kind of mortgage you might want. And
Absolutely.
that's what you're doing. You've made connections with all the funeral homes, or with many of the funeral homes. So and crematory, so you know what people want, where their budget is, how much these things cost, what they can do, what they can't do, where they're located, how many people they can hold. And so you can really meet people's needs without them doing all this homework.
That's right.
That's what it sounds like. That's amazing.
Absolutely. Thank
That's
you.
amazing. So now also talk a little bit about Medicaid planning. I don't know if everybody knows this. I recently did this for my aunt, a Medicaid spend down. And one of the things about Medicaid allows you to, if you have the money, use some of the money for your prearranged funeral planning. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So the state of Connecticut is, again, very restricted. So they do have pretty strict format with how the Medicaid compliant contracts need to be laid out. But they absolutely do allow an individual to prepay for their funeral services up to $10,000. And they can also have a separate secondary account called a burial space account or contract. And that one can only have burial space items that would remain at the cemetery on them, but there's no dollar limit. So you could put your casket, the outer burial container, the cemetery fees, grave openings, and you could also cover a headstone. So the state does allow a full funeral, absolutely, for every individual. And as long as they're structured in a Medicaid compliant way, that's a very popular reason that people come to pre-plan their services.
No, it's a great thing because, well, I know like my aunt didn't have enough money to do that. But if she did, we could have prepaid her funeral service, and now it's not left up to the family to do something when you're gone, which is always, family loves that. Plus, all your wishes get to be, you're outlining what you want, right? Instead of what somebody else is going to want to do for you. And tell me about where the money goes. Like if they prepay, if you're 80 years old and you prepay and you do Medicaid spend down and now have to go to a nursing home and live another 10 years, what actually happens? Where's it go?
Good question. So there's several recognized holding vehicles that the funeral homes can use to hold the funds from the time of prepayment until the time of death. And some of the options are trusts, some of them are insurance companies. But essentially what it is an escrow account in the beneficiary's name. And the reason that the law requires that is in case the funeral home goes out of business, or if you move away, or for whatever reason, if you just simply change your mind and would like to use a different provider, you always do have the right to change the funeral home at any point until the services are provided.
So you're saying, let's say in this case, somebody paid $10,000, did a Medicaid spend down, put $10,000 and picked, a funeral home in Fairfield. And then they decided that money now goes into some safe place, not that funeral home. It goes into like a legal or insurance escrow account that will always be there. And if up to the day they decided they moved and they want to do something in Wallingford, Connecticut instead, they still have the same funds and they can move it over.
That's
so
right.
They actually made their arrangement but didn't prepay that particular place. Is that correct?
That's right. So different funeral homes will have different ways that they accept transferred prearrangements. A lot of the time, if the funeral home went out of business and it was acquired, then the purchasing funeral home would take over those prearranged agreements. Sometimes the funeral homes will guarantee their goods and services, meaning that if you live 10 years in between paying and death and their prices have doubled, it doesn't matter because you're locked in. So it may be that if you had that agreement with the initial funeral home and then you transfer it to a new funeral home, they may not have that same agreement. So it is important to ask questions before you transfer it to make sure that the receiving funeral home is on board with everything that was set up beforehand. What you can't do that is important to note is get money back. out of it if you're on Medicaid. If you're not on Medicaid, the money's yours to do whatever you want with. The survivors do have some flexibility as far as changes. If the decedent is on Medicaid at the time of death, any remaining balance in the prepaid account would go back to the estate. It would go back to the state of Connecticut because,
so, in other words, if they paid $10,000 for a funeral and then they die and their heirs decide, we're just going to do a little cremation, they can't pocket the money.
The family cannot get the money back. That's right. Because the state does require it's placed into an irrevocable account. And that's just so that people can't, take advantage of the system because the state is providing a whole lot of care from that time.
Sure. Well, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Is it different? I know Medicaid is different in every state. So is this funeral planning different in every state?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Most
so this is specific.
States have a single contract.
Okay. All right. Okay, that's good to know. Now, what about if you're not on Medicaid and you want to come and do, does it make a difference? How does it differ?
It does make a difference because it wouldn't have to be irrevocable, meaning that changes can be made at any point, and if there's anything remaining in the account at the time of death, it would go right back to the estate or the named beneficiary.
Okay. About how much does it cost? What's the range across the state just for like a cremation?
So a simple cremation can range anywhere from about $1,400 to $6,000. And the reason there's a big difference in that is because you have to really figure out what's included. So there are some cremation providers, and I'm sure that everybody in Connecticut has seen like the big billboards as you drive by on the freeway. And they advertise the really low cost, $9.95 or $1,000, cremations. Those are mostly through cremation providers as opposed to full service funeral homes. In the state of Connecticut, you do have to go through a funeral director that is employed by a funeral home. So you can't go directly to a crematory, but there are funeral homes that have established these cremation services that don't offer any use of their facilities or their premises. It's really just a direct cremation disposition. So there's no hand holding, no online obituaries. They're not going to help you file the death certificates even. So a lot of those things, when you get involved with the lower cost crematories, if they need an additional technician for the transfer, there's going to be an upcharge. If they need any sort of tools or materials or overtime hours, it's going to be a lot more than what the advertised price is. So it's important to do your homework there for sure. The full service funeral homes typically will have a higher price than the cremation providers. I would say the average is probably about $3,000 to $4,000. And those funeral homes do absolutely offer the chance to spend time with your loved one in a private room. They'll dress your loved one. They'll bathe them. They'll help you write the obituary. They'll file the death certificates for you. So you can see if a loved one's in California, maybe the cremation provider makes the most sense because they don't have a need to see their loved one. They're really just trying to do the best they can to handle the arrangements from afar. But if you wanted, a little more care and attention, I would recommend going through a full service funeral home.
So do you get involved only at the beginning when they're planning it or also when they pass away?
My role is purely for pre-planning. And part of the paperwork packet that I prepare has on the front page a summary sheet that explains exactly what was intended with the funds, a list of the services and merchandise, and then the funeral home will sign off and acknowledge whether or not they're guaranteeing those prices or if it's just dollar in for dollar out.
So some funeral homes will guarantee a rate lock-in and some will say it's good for a number of years and some will just say it's whatever it costs at the time?
That's right.
Okay. So people have to know that when they're doing it. And that's all part of the contract. All right, that's good to know. Now, what if it's a non-crematory? What if you're being buried?
If you're being buried, I would say the price on the low end without any services and really just transport with a minimal casket to a cemetery, I would say you're looking at around, then you have to say, like, are the cemetery fees included? So just funeral home fees for the services, casket, outer burial container, which I could talk for days about what's involved and required for a burial in Connecticut. But I would say probably about 8,000 on the low end for the funeral home side of things, and then another 5,000 for the cemetery side of things. So call it
And what
about
about if you want to wake,
13,000.
go to the church or wake and things like that?
If you went to the church and had a wake and all in, I would say probably closer to 20,000.
So at the time, so let's say you plan this funeral, right? And at the time, is there then, like, let's say I'm going to have it at, whatever, Fairfield Funeral Home, if there was such a thing. And so at the time of death, and let's say my parent has it there, I go to Fairfield Funeral Home, and now are they going to like make up a brochure for me, do a wake, do a eulogy? Like, are they going to do everything? Is it all outlined, or do I have to then pay more fees for things like that?
It's all outlined, and this is why I incorporated that summary page is so important, because the purchaser doesn't necessarily know what they need. They know what they want and they can explain that to me, but it's up to me to determine, or the funeral home to determine, what's actually involved in that.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, for example, the purchaser doesn't necessarily know that 98% of the cemeteries in Connecticut require an outer burial container. They know they need a casket, but half the people I sit with have no idea that they need that outer enclosure, which
Why do they need
oftentimes is
that?
over
Why do they need
1,500
that?
bucks.
Why do they need that?
So cemeteries started requiring outer burial containers some years ago as part of perpetual care. So essentially what it is, it's a concrete liner, and it's placed in the ground prior to people showing up to the burial. And when the casket gets there, it's lowered in, and then the lid is placed on top, and then the ground is covered. So, 100 years ago, that we would just put the caskets underground, and and everything was more or less hand dug. We didn't have a whole lot of heavy machinery. Now, with the heavy machinery coming through, it's pushing the weight of the ground down, which ultimately crushes the casket, and then the monuments start to tip over. So, in order to keep the grounds flush and keep everything looking good, as part of perpetual care, the cemeteries now require these outer burial containers. So they're just concrete liners that go and encase the casket.
Wow, that's cool to know. I had no idea. They
So
say that.
that's a perfect example of something that maybe they wouldn't know is needed, that a funeral home, it's their responsibility to tell them if
Mhm.
you need a hairdresser, as opposed to the embalmer does the hair themselves, because every establishment is so different from the next.
So I could see one big benefit of using you, and I was just with my own father's funeral. When you are when you are very emotional and you are going to, for instance, for us at the funeral home, and they have huge packages, and my mom was just saying yes to everything that she didn't need because she was distraught. So we were sitting there, and she was, yes, I'll take, the flowers. Yes, I'll take this. And one thing she said, yes, I'll take the limo. And I'm like, Mom, Dad's being cremated. You live a half a mile from the church. That's $450. Like, I wasn't trying to like tell her what to do and what not to do, but the prices are pretty high for everything, and she didn't need a lot of stuff. So, you know, having a pre-arrangement, people have time to think what's logical, what makes sense, compare prices, which you're not going to do. Typically you're just going to show up at your local church often, or your local funeral home where everybody goes, and just assume that they're going to give you a fair price, right? So
Right.
it's not without even thinking, you're just doing things. So I love the fact that's a huge benefit besides the Medicaid planning,
Mhm.
besides making it easy for your family because you've outlined it and they don't have to guess at what you want and what your needs are. And you probably see people, like, if you don't, I've seen people cremate people in fancy caskets. Why did you buy a $5,000 casket when your person's being cremated? Like, it's just that, emotion comes into play at that point. Nothing's too good for my parent, whatever. So it's great that there's so many benefits. I just see so many benefits. It's amazing. What are some of the interesting things people have asked for at their funerals?
Hmm. Well, I had one lady. People love their pets.
Yes,
I hear
they
a
do.
lot of incorporating of their pets' cremated remains, like with them. I had one woman, not that it was a weird request, but she recorded a video to play at her service, which I've never seen before, although I think I've seen it on like a movie maybe once before, like if you're watching this, I'm dead type of thing.
Exactly. Kind
um,
of cool.
Bagpipes are popular. I mean, I did it once. So have you ever heard of a celebrant?
I don't know what
So a
that is.
celebrant is an offering of clergy, like a non-denominational clergy that officiates the service. And essentially they meet the deceased through the survivors by asking them questions, more like interviewing them, finds out who they are, and then creates a life service. So I did a celebrant service a few months back, and the theme was rap music and cereal. So that was
So,
a very unique service.
so you're kind of like celebrating their life.
Yes,
You're like
exactly.
a non-denominational priest, preacher, rabbi, celebrating their life, talking about
Exactly.
them through learning about them. And then you had to rap, Sahara?
No, I played a song.
Oh, okay. You didn't have to like make up a poem and do a rap.
No, I did not. I did not perform in that way that day.
Wow, if I gave that idea to my son, I'm sure he would want to do that too. For his one day. Well, I mean he's young, but he would love that. That's cool. I know a lot of people rather a celebration of life than a mourning kind of thing. Do you often get that?
So much, so much has changed over the past 30 years. I'm only 32, but I know just from reading the history books and the history of funeral service and geographically speaking, just where families are located, we're so scattered. Um, I've definitely noticed a change in services go moving from the traditions that religion provided.
Hmm.
Now there's a lot, there's a lot more people that are doing things in addition to their traditional religious services or in place of. And across the industry, I would say that most funeral directors would agree that the wake, used to be 2 or 3 night wake, has now been replaced by the reception. The reception is getting, a live band and they're playing their memorial videos and they're sharing stories. So
Hmm.
I think that's a really cool shift. Um, Absolutely. There's definitely a move away from the cookie cutter, every person has the same funeral. But I do think that with that loss, we've lost some of the comfort that those traditional norms brought us, because without a set of instructions, we really are lost. And there's so many more options now today than there ever has been, that it's like, yeah, where do we begin? Is this what my loved one would have wanted? Are we doing the right thing? So to have the plan in place by the person themselves turns the obligation of funeral planning into this incredible opportunity to carry out their wishes and feel good about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
why I think, how do you broach the subject if you have a parent that doesn't want to, or a loved one that doesn't want to discuss it? How do you recommend broaching the subject?
There are so many resources online. One of my favorites is called deathoverdinner.org. I could be wrong. I think it's .org, Death Over Dinner. If you just Google Death Over Dinner, you'll find it. But what it is, it's a library more or less, and it's got um, you invite your family or the person that you'd like to speak to about death. You invite them a link, and the website will give them options. So there's a video that they have to watch, a piece of reading that they have to read, and an audio clip that they have to listen to
Okay.
before going to the dinner. And you can kind of pick which one would make sense for your loved ones. So if you're doing it for your dad or whatever, for my dad, I would do something Christian based. I would figure out what would resonate with him. And it's cool because they've got the writing piece. If people are visual learners, they've got the video and then the auditory. And then after they do their homework, they come over for dinner and you're able to have an open-minded conversation. Like, look, I'm not trying to spring this on you or say that you're dying tomorrow, but it's a conversation that we need to have.
What if they aren't even open to listening or reading or anything because they just don't want to deal with it?
Some people just don't want to open that door, and I've learned firsthand that you can't make them. If a person really doesn't want to discuss it, just ask their permission, or maybe ask them to write down the fact that they don't care what happens, because that little piece will bring the planner comfort when they're faced with all these questions. So even if your loved one doesn't want to discuss it, I would say have them, agree that they don't want to discuss it. Write that down, and then just have them say that it's okay. It's totally up to you to make those decisions. And then do your best to do what you think they would like.
Who is usually coming to you? Is it the person themselves, the family member? Like who usually contacts you?
80% of my business is the individual planning for themselves. And I would say about 20% is a person planning for a loved one, but most of that, the loved one would be included.
Okay. And the cost to use you as a planner is
totally free. So
unbelievable.
I have different levels of service that I provide, but the entry level, which is just a consultation, reviewing your needs and giving you estimates from different providers, completely free.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Is there anything they have to pay for with you?
No, with me, there's nothing they have to do. If and when they want to move forward with a prepayment plan, there are plenty of different payment options. But as far as just my services, no.
That's great. That is like you really found a niche and a need, and people don't know where to turn except to traditionally wherever they went down the block before to the local funeral home. But there are so many other options. And like I said, so many people are living all over now. I have an aunt that moved to New Mexico and she's from New York. And I've said to her, you die there? No, we're having a funeral in New York. We're not, everybody's not traipsing over to New Mexico. And she's cool with that. She's like, all right, you can cremate me here and have a service for me there. I'm like, okay, good. But I mean, just having the conversation, because people have moved all over. A lot of parents in this area have moved down to Florida, and everybody else is left up here, for instance. Or, what do you do just logistically? But financially, that's a big thing too. Now, what actually happens, Sahara, to people that don't have any money if they didn't have a plan and they're not on Medicaid? Like, what happens if your family just can't afford to pay for anything?
So if you absolutely have nothing, and you're on Medicaid and you're a Connecticut resident, Connecticut will reimburse a funeral home $1,350. And as mentioned, there are cremation providers that do have services available for that price. So they more or less have contracts with, the local hospitals or medical examiner. And, if there is nobody that claims the remains after a certain amount of time, then they may just go to a cremation provider that the state picks. But if there's any sort of estate at all, if there's a car, if there's a home, if there's any liquid assets, any time that a person goes through probate, the funeral home would be the first paid. So
what if you're young and you have no money? What if you're not on Medicaid? Just out of curiosity, what happens if somebody dies and has no money?
So you apply for the 1350 benefit through the state. I don't know if you have to be on Medicaid to qualify for it. I thought that you did, but I could be wrong. If you're young, yeah, I guess that's it. The state would, if there's absolutely no funding available, the state would cover 1350.
And then
but if there's anything, like even a car or $20 in the bank account, they'll deduct the $20 out of the 1350.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So amazing. So people can get in touch with you at 203-767-7679. And I know you're super busy doing this all day and meeting with people and making all your, and I think one of the big benefits in working with you is that you have an in with all these funeral homes and crematories and places that you could even maybe get a discount if, they really want, if somebody really wanted to go somewhere and really couldn't afford it. Since you have pull, since you're doing so many, and you also know who is going to be perfect for what. And I think that a lot of people just go to the first place they're familiar with and just assume their service is going to be just like everybody else's and
Mm-hmm.
their prices and their offering. And it's not, right?
It's
It
not.
differs across the board. And, but just out of curiosity, how did you get involved so young in working as a funeral director?
I think it's just a calling. I always say, like, my family wasn't in the funeral industry, but my mother lost her mother when she was just 7, and she carried that with her, obviously, through her life, and she was sort of obsessed with death and that she would befriend people that were dying, and she always kind of was seeking answers psychologically. So we talked about it a lot as a family, and I went to a lot of funerals, and then both of my best friends in high school lost their father, so I think just the way that I noticed I was able to shepherd people through it as opposed to be affected emotionally myself. That's how I knew.
Wow, that's amazing. I've had a little bit of a similar experience. So with my, I have, as you know, I have a senior home for seniors with memory care issues, and I was thinking this is going to be so sad because I'm getting seniors at the tail end of their life, money are in their 90s, 80s, and you know, I'm thinking this is going to be a lot of death. But in a year that we've been open, we've had 3 people die. 2 came to us on hospice, but it was anything but that. It was beautiful because their families were so happy. They were in a beautiful home environment with the other residents around, like singing and touching them and basically, stroking them, saying goodbye, and um, and the families were just so happy. That they didn't die at home, which I thought people would prefer, but people don't really want their loved ones. I'm finding out to die in their house, like they don't want them there. I thought they might want people in their home as long as possible, but when you're dying, nobody wants you dying for months in the next room over that they now have to
Mhm.
use for their kids' playroom or something. Like it's just so it became like so beautiful and not upsetting, except missing the person, but like a lovely way to go. And so I'm happy that I wasn't, you know, it wasn't didn't become a really sad thing because death is inevitable and you do have to plan for it, and it can be a beautiful thing when it's your time, not when it's in a car wreck or something. But,
That's right.
so I totally understand, but that's amazing what you do, and just an amazing service. And I just anybody who is thinking of planning right now, and like Sahara said, my gosh, like if COVID didn't make you think of your mortality, I don't know what else did. I did my entire will and trust during this period. It's just, it's been a crazy time. So great idea, great service, great niche, amazing. I wish you the best success. Come back and tell us all about any changes and all, but so good to see you again.
Thank you so much for the
Is
opportunity,
there
Deidre.
anything else you want to tell people? I didn't mean to just like end it for you. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
No, I mean, anybody can call me anytime if you don't necessarily want an appointment, but you want to explore death discussions more. I also have a bi-weekly death cafe that I partnered with the Ferguson Library in Stamford on.
What
So
exactly is that? I was going to ask you about that. The Death
So that'll be
Cafe.
tomorrow,
But what
from 2
is
o'clock
Death
to 3
Cafe?
o'clock.
What is a Death Cafe? What is it?
So a death cafe is a worldwide organization. I believe it started in Europe that basically just provides space for people to explore death in a safe environment. And typically, or traditionally, they would have coffee and cake to make it even more comfortable. And it's just a good group of friends. We have a pretty steady group of people that show up, and we really just talk about how death has affected us over it's every 2 weeks. So every other week we'll share stories or just get into heady topics. What COVID was very interesting to explore, and I think it's almost like a support group at this point.
Is it like a morning group, or is it more of a
No, not at all. It's a lively group of curious individuals who want to have conversations that you wouldn't have at Starbucks.
Okay. I never heard of a death cafe. I was like, that's okay. That's pretty
You should come. They're really, really, really fun.
So who's invited?
Everybody's invited. It's open to the public. It's on Zoom.
It's a free event and it's on Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
And how do people find out about that at Stanford Public Library?
It's the Ferguson Library, which is the Stanford Public Library, or you can go to my website and get the link, or you can call me and I can add you to the mailing list.
Sure. What is your website?
smartfuneralplanning.com.
And Sahara, do people come to you and ask you about other places? Like, I have a cousin in Chicago. Are there people like you other places?
I think so, more in other areas of the country, just because the Northeast is so restricted with the licensing that's required. You have to be a funeral director as well as a life insurance agent to write the contracts that I write, where in some other states, the insurance agents can do all the work. So I think it's more popular in other places, where in Connecticut, they really want you to be informed and have a good plan in place that's not going to hurt you in the future.
That's amazing. And you have to know so much, but you're doing a fabulous job and a great service. And I thank you so much. So it's smartfuneralplanning.com. If you would like to go to a death cafe, what days are they on?
Every other Thursday.
Every other Thursday on Zoom.
On Zoom. With Veterans Day and Thanksgiving coming up in November, we're doing a couple of Wednesdays. But if you're on the mailing list, I send out a reminder the day before.
All right. So you can get in touch with Sahara at 203-767-7679 or smartfuneralplanning.com. That's an easy one to remember. Thank you so much, Sahara. Look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Bye. Is that not interesting? Like, I was blown away by what Sahara does. First that she came up with this concept out of a niche and a need and just has gone gangbusters with it. And she cannot work enough hours. There aren't enough hours in the day for her to work and do everything she needs to do. So kudos to you for coming up with such an incredible concept. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And until we see you next time, be well, be safe. And
hi, Deirdre here again. Thank you for joining me on Let's Talk Seniors Memory Care Issues. Is this an issue hitting home? Do you have a parent or loved one with memory care issues who you feel is not safe at home anymore? Are isolation, falls, and safety issues becoming a big concern? Welcome to Dogwood Senior Home, premier boutique residential senior living specializing in memory care. It's country living at its best in the Huntington section of Shelton, Connecticut. We're truly a home with only 6 senior residents living as one family unit. Senior residential homes are concepts sweeping the nation with 47,000 across the U.S. We're pleased to open Dogwood Senior Home as it will be only number 6 for Connecticut. Brand new, sparkling clean, opening mid-June. And safe, safe, safe. We are COVID-free. Residential care homes boast a very low COVID infection rate across the nation. This is due to the intimacy of size and speed in which the caretakers can shift to accommodate immediate needs. They are much safer than the large homes and facilities, as you can imagine. It has been documented that residents have less falls and a better quality of life in a residential home environment. Our home is more affordable than the big box facility. You pay one all-inclusive price, and that price is guaranteed for the life of the resident. With an incredible 1-to-3 caregiver ratio, which you won't find anywhere else. Our friendly, loving caregivers are dedicated and trained in Alzheimer's, dementia, and Parkinson's issues. We're only taking 6 residents, so the home will fill up fast. Call me at 203-689-7562 for a talk and tour. I would love to meet you and your loved one. See you soon. Bye.